This week, we welcome Tim Lietz, National Practice Leader, Internal Audit, Risk and Compliance at Jefferson Wells, to discuss internal audit focal points for 2026. In the Leadership and Communication segment, conventional cybersecurity won't protect your AI. Will cybersecurity budgets increase in 2026? To execute a unified strategy, leaders need to shadow each other and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Ever feel like your network infrastructure is stuck in the past? Meet Meter, the company reimagining what it means to get and stay online. Meter delivers full-stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular, all in one seamless, scalable, and secure solution. From hardware design and firmware to software deployment and support, Meter streamlines every part of your network while giving you all the control and transparency you need. Whether you're managing a branch office, retail stores, or a massive data center, Meter gives you performance, reliability, and the visibility you need to stay in control. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to securityweekly.com/Meter to book a demo now. That's securityweekly.com/Meter, METER. This episode is brought to you by Adaptive Security, the first cybersecurity company backed by OpenAI. AI has fundamentally reshaped the threat landscape. Today, the greatest risk isn't someone breaking into your systems, it's someone breaking into your trust. Deepfake voices joining your video calls. AI-crafted phishing emails that perfectly mimic your executives. Even synthetic job applicants entering through the front door. Adaptive Security is designed to counter these new realities. The company delivers real-time attack simulations that show security teams exactly what modern AI-driven threats look and sound like, and prepares them to respond effectively. Learn more at securityweekly.com/adaptive. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 431, recorded January 13th, 2026, but will air on January 19th, 2026 for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is my co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, Ben, 2 days in a row.
Yeah, I know. 2 days in 1 week. This is pretty impressive. So looking forward to jumping into it. Let's see how.
So the question is, did you make any further progress on the house in the last day?
In the last day. Yeah, actually I did. I installed door handles yesterday. So
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Ben's been building the house for a while, so he's almost at the finish line.
That door handles is a good sign, Ben. You're at the finish line.
Yes. All right, one quick announcement, then we'll get into it. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSAC 2026 All Access Pass. RSAC 2026 conference will take place March 23rd to the 26th in San Francisco. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC26 and use the code 56U5SecWeekly. I'll be there. Hope to see you there as well. Tim Lietz is a national practice leader of the Internal Audit, Risk and Compliance team at Jefferson Wells. Tim, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt and Ben, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
All right, internal audit, not typically like a super hot, lovely topic. You know, we always think the internal audit guys are a little dry and boring, but that's all right. We're going to talk through this anyways. I'm really curious. You guys did a report, right, on the shifts, and I saw some really interesting shifts in focus. And I think it's really interesting to talk through those. But first, before we kind of get into the changes, give us a backstory on what's in the report and some of the work that you guys have done in prep for kind of this 2026 focal area.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We have done this survey annually for the last 7 years. So we've got some good year-over-year data and trends, and where we're seeing the internal audit leaders, the chief audit executives today. We had about 250 chief audit executives respond to this year's survey. So it was a really nice population, a variety of industries, different size industries and organizations that responded this year. But it's really, we asked them, what are your top focal points going into 2026? What are the top things you're going to have on your internal audit plans starting the new year right now? And the responses were, I would say, somewhat typical. Cybersecurity has been number one for the 7 years we've been doing this. But then I would say the next 5 or 6, there's a lot of volatility at times. This year we saw AI really jump up. Barely resonated in the top 10 2 years ago. Last year it was number 5. This year it jumped all the way up to number 2. Not surprisingly, right?
Right.
But 3 of the top 4 concerns for audit leaders this year are IT related. Not surprisingly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And some interesting ones kind of dropped out of the top 5 too, which I thought was a little interesting.
Yeah, you can only have so many in the top 5,
Yeah,
right? There's so many emerging risks, and something has to budge a little bit and drop to the bottom, or I would say at least towards 8, 9, and 10 of the top 10 lists. We saw third-party risk drop a little bit, fraud, but I would tell you right now, with economic headwinds, fraud is always going to be top of mind for chief audit executives, especially now in 2026. The more and more headwinds we see economically, the more opportunities there are for fraud to occur. And now we're seeing some of the fraudsters really leverage AI, believe it or not, to enable some of their fraudulent schemes to happen a little bit easier.
Yeah. So I want to talk through some of these. Cybersecurity, you said, has been the top for 7 years in a row, which is interesting to me, right? Is sometimes we know it's one of the top risks, but then I always see this disconnect with sometimes at the board and at the executive level, but obviously internal audit still sees it as a primary. Can you reconcile that difference for me a little bit? Like,
It doesn't seem to align, right?
Right. It doesn't seem to align with the board. And that's why I was like, really? Is it really the highest? Because I don't see that on the board side.
It is interesting. I used to be also in charge of enterprise risk management, ERM, in my past life when I was a chief audit executive as well. And it was always interesting when we did our annual updates of risk and risk management within the organization I was at. If you would pull the C-suite and then you go into the board level and hit your middle managers, I would tell you that typically the board was aligned with middle management, and middle management tends to know exactly what's going on because they're living it day in and day out. Sometimes the C-suite gets a little bit distracted on some things that aren't necessarily aligned always with the board and middle management. So it was always fun to watch that. This year's survey, we did also ask chief audit executives what the top concerns would be for their audit committee chairs. And so we got some nice feedback there. It was not cybersecurity, it was really data privacy, which you could say is very much related to cybersecurity. But the board this year is very much relying on, the organization to have good controls in place to secure that data, to make sure that the data is not, there's no breaches where someone takes control of a large chunk of their data. But then from then on, the rest was the same. AI was number 2 for your audit committees or boards. Data transfer or the business transformation and digitization was also in there as a top 3 IT concern for audit committees.
It's interesting because you think when you position that and you say, the number 1 is cyber, and then you've got, AI, you've got privacy, you've got digital transformation, like all of those are cyber, right? Like
they are.
There's a big component of that. So when you think about AI, why the concern from AI? Well, I mean, look, there's things that may not be like, the fraud side of it. But again, because it happens in the digital realm, it tends to all come back to a cyber component, right? And the protective mechanism against that. How are you going to defend against it? You could do some employee awareness and training around, AI, but it's not the 90% of where the problem's going to come from, right? Digital transformation. Well, you're putting all that information into digital format and it comes back to controls and security, right? And so again, I harken back to, it's really interesting that alignment. We were talking about this before the show, that it seems like the import isn't given to the CISO, and we talk about that a lot on the show. The CISO seems to be the secondhand part of the business when
Mhm.
really it's foundational to all of the business, right?
Absolutely. I would agree 100%, Ben. But that's my
Yeah.
viewpoint.
Right.
So
We
why
talked
the
about
why
this. Yeah.
any thought from an audit on why the disconnect there?
That's the, $100,000 question. I don't know why there is such a disconnect when, when I was a chief audit executive, and even today when I'm working with clients, I view the CISO just as important as the CIO. Is they have to work hand in hand. And I encourage my clients who sit in the chief audit executive seats to work very collaboratively with your CIO and CISO at all times to make sure you're on the same page. I would sit
Yeah,
down literally with my CIO. We talked about it,
yeah,
Matt, before you jumped on. Is every month I would have lunch at a little local Mexican restaurant with my CIO and CISO, and we would sit down and just talk about what's going on in each of our worlds, what we are really concerned about, what are the top things we're concerned about, and we wanted to make sure we were aligned. And I would have frank conversations with them. They knew me pretty well. And I'd ask them, I said, what are the 3 or 4 things in 2026, say, that if they happened would cause severe career damage, potentially job loss, embarrassment, reputation damage? Those are the things that internal audit and my team should be addressing. And those are the things we should be focused on going into the new year. We don't want to be working on something that the CISO or the CIO is completely not concerned about at all. They know is working fine. Don't waste time looking over here. Look at the things that really could impact the organization and impact us as an IT team. I wanted them to be as wildly successful as possible, because when the CIO, the IT teams, the CISO are all having great years, generally the organization is going to be on the
yeah,
right path.
feel well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to pick at that because we did have that conversation earlier, right? And I think a lot of my peers, a lot of other C-level executives see the interaction with audit as adversarial at times,
Mm,
right? And there's that natural tension. I
yeah.
don't think you're ever going to get rid of it completely. I think that's good, a little bit of tension, right? Because it keeps people honest in their roles. It's not, we're all friends and everybody knows everything, and like we're going to help each other out all the time. But the focus of audit, like if there's truly a partnership with the CIO, with the CISO, if you flip that script a little bit and have that interaction where, hey, let's be a little more open kimono about it, a little bit more transparent about it, and have that dialogue where, on the audit side, you have that trust that you're not going to get burned by sharing this stuff, but you can actually focus on the things that really are going to move the bubble for the organization.
Mm.
That's so much more empowering if you can get to that point. And do you have any, I don't know, tips, words of wisdom, things to focus on to build that relationship with audit from the CIO or the CISO? I think that could serve a lot of people more than they realize.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned one word, Ben, the word trust. When the trust is there between the parties, and that was the thing that I told my audit team. I had a team of about 20 people in my last audit shop. I told them that, our reputation is the gold standard. We have to protect that with everything we do day in and day out. And we have to enable trust to be built religiously every day. We can't do anything that would erode some of that trust, because you start losing your reputation, and then the senior leaders lose confidence in what your team can accomplish. But when you have the trust factor, your leaders know that audit's not going to come in and throw them under the bus, or present an audit report at the end of the project that is skewed. It's not balanced. It's not fair. It doesn't have their input, because it's really important to have the executive or whoever's over that process that you're auditing have their viewpoints clearly and fairly reflected in the final audit report. And at the end of the day, we're all on the same team, internal audit and
Yeah.
the senior executives.
Yeah.
We're on the same team. We're trying to make the organization better, trying to get better day in and day out. And we're trying to identify problems early before they become significant issues that could derail the business.
Yeah. There's a couple other areas I want to dig into a little bit. So data privacy, cybersecurity, but then a drop off on third party. And again, I saw a resurgence of third party in this last year, because I think we're outsourcing more stuff. Our data is with a lot of these third parties. Why do you think the drop off in third party? I would think that would still stay pretty high from a focal point because we're still struggling there a little bit with our third party risk management flows.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. And quite frankly, it could be the shiny new, toy being AI, dropping a
Yeah.
little bit of the focal points away from third party. And now I would say, I'm sure you guys have heard the term nth party, right?
Yes.
Um, a lot of our clients are financial services organizations, and the regulators love to focus right now on nth party risk. And it is very true that it's amazing. And I see this a lot in the work that we do because we're a professional services organization. So I'm always the outsider coming in as an advisor, but my team gets access to systems, right?
Mhm.
And at times we get access to data that's very sensitive. I try to make sure that our team does not take possession of that data, but we're just reading only, right, Ben? So we have access to see it. I don't want to have it possession on our machines and then stored. I prefer not to ever have that scenario. But it's surprising to see how many organizations actually just grant access to outside vendors or parties that they work with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And then maybe at the end of the contract, the end of the project, they forget about turning that access off. Or what does the vendor do with all that data they might have had possession with? How are they protecting it? There's a lot of things that sometimes organizations don't pay attention to that maybe they should with those third parties. And then the other thing I'll mention real quickly is we're starting to get a lot of, I would say, IT security surveys, and I'm probably going to see a lot of them coming here in the next few weeks. They tend to re-up on a calendar year. And some of these questionnaires are 25, 30 pages long, right, Ben?
I
And
know.
they're asking my firm, what kind of access do you have to our data? What are you doing with it? Now the questions are you using AI tools
Yep.
with our data to produce results for us? So they're really digging into the use of the data, who has access to it, which I think is really good. But there's organizations today that really don't pay as much attention to that as probably they should.
Yeah, and that ties into the third piece on the generative AI side and the AI stuff, right? Because a lot of the AI tools people are using are third-party tools, right? They're OpenAI or it's Claude up in AWS or Bedrock or this or that. Like all this is third party on top of it. So maybe what's happening is a bunch of the stuff is getting munged together. You've got data privacy, cybersecurity, third party in AI all kind of intermingled, and when you split them out they look like one's moving over the other, but these are all interrelated and have to be kind of addressed holistically. Back to Ben's point a little bit, like cybersecurity is almost like the foundation because all these other little areas, cybersecurity is kind of like the baseline, and then you've got nuances, whether it's third party or AI or some other or privacy regulation.
I would agree, and I'm sure Ben, I would anticipate Ben totally agreeing on this. I saw a survey a few weeks ago. They were polling employees of large organizations in the U.S. And surprisingly, I guess maybe not surprisingly, I'm sure Ben is probably like, yeah, this is normal, but 55% of the employees admitted to using AI tools that were not authorized that they should be using
Yeah.
on their day-to-day activities at work. They're
Yep.
just 55%, over half are using tools they shouldn't be using. And then the second thing that caught my eye on that survey is, again, I think it was over 55. It was like 58% of employees had admitted to putting sensitive data from their company into an open, chat
Yeah,
GPT or
and
open
that's the
AI
harder
mode.
one.
That's
That's
not
the harder one
protected.
to control because I think
How do you
as
control that? You can't, right?
like as an auditor, you have to see this when you're looking at the data and the control sets, is that the tighter the controls become within an organization, right? You face this challenge of, okay, you're making it really hard for me to do something in a corporate asset, which is protected. So I'm going to do something outside the corporate asset because I can get to the information I need quicker, potentially, right? But now you've hosted really sensitive data in what's potentially just a public model or a public system that the company has no control over. That whole, we're back to shadow IT, right? And that's a huge challenge, and a lot of companies haven't figured out this balance yet.
Yeah, because
It's hard.
what's it? I dump out all my Salesforce customer data, upload it into ChatGPT, and I'm like, summarize all this data for me. Whoop, there it goes. Your entire customer list is now sitting in public open
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
And so for the CISO or the CIO, right, you're under this constant gun to accept new technology and new risk before you've really evaluated, because otherwise you run the risk of the business running faster than you're able to catch with, public and shadow IT.
I saw something a couple weeks ago. This is probably right before Christmas, so 4 or 5 weeks ago. You guys know the AI tool Claude, right?
Yep.
So the these are not the white hat hackers that I have on my team. These are the really nefarious hackers halfway around the world use Claude, and they just simply ask Claude, what are the most vulnerable corporations in America today to IT security? Who has the weakest IT security? Claude does its search based on queries from employees who put in, how do I fix this IT weakness, right, Ben? Like probably the worst thing, because you're now throwing up a red flag, say, hey, look at me. We have weaknesses. How do we fix it? So they identified 17 companies that had really bad IT systems based on the chats that their employees were putting in or the prompts they were putting into Claude. Then the hackers, the next step said, write me specific code for each one of these. They identified 17 companies they wanted to hack. Write me specific code on how to break into this company's specific weakness. And Claude wrote the code for the hackers to use to break into the systems based on the weakness the employees have put in.
Yeah, I mean, the emergence of AI as a vector for threat actors to use, right, is just the velocity has increased. I don't know, 100-fold. It's crazy the amount of things that you're not expecting it to be used for that it can be used for.
There's an article in the next segment that specifically conventional security is not going to solve your AI security problems. Like, right? So we're fighting an uphill battle. So I guess my question back to you, Tim, now is, I'm a CISO. All these changes are coming. Internal audit's focus is shifting around this stuff. How do I prepare and get ready for the audit that's about to come?
I don't know if you can ever be fully prepared, right, Ben? But I would.
You never expect the Spanish Inquisition,
right? But I think if you have a really good relationship, a good trusting relationship with your audit department, I would just sit down and before you had the kickoff meeting and say, here's some of the things I'm really concerned about. Here's some of the things my team is really trying to monitor and watch. These are the things I'd like for you to at least look at, kick the tires on. Tell me if they're working as I think they are. If they're not, tell me how we can fix them or at least get better, close some of the openings and some of the holes that might be there. But it's really just fixing or identifying blind spots, right, Ben, that you don't know about. And those are the things that audits should be focused on, in my opinion. So to prep for an audit is really, to me, just have good relationship, good collaboration, good communication. Expect communication throughout, right, Ben, from start to finish.
How do you facilitate that? We talked about trust a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But how do you facilitate that conversation? Because going into that, it can be, I'll say scary, right? Like maybe too strong a word, but like, look, there can be some trepidation about like, I don't want to expose things that I know are potentially problematic because then the audit's going to pin me to the wall on them, right? And I already know that there are issues. But I mean, I think that's really what you should do. Like you should be able to have that honest conversation, but how do you facilitate the entry into that so you're building the right bridge there?
Right. It's maybe be proactive and say, this is what I expect out of the audit. This is what I'm looking for the final result to be out of your internal audit team. How can we work together to make this a successful endeavor for the organization to make sure that we both, it's like a win-win. Audit's going to check, off that they looked at some of the more intense risks within the organization. And, you as a CISO get some comfort that someone independent from your team has come in and looked at your environment as well.
And I know we often struggle for budgets. I've often found that that's one way to kind of get the direction on the budget that you're looking for as a CISO or a CIO is to have that partnership to say, look, these are the things I'm concerned with. I want to make part of my next year's agenda. If it makes it on an audit finding or an assessment, that's pretty likely you're going to get more budget for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I literally just had a conversation 4 business days ago with one of my clients here in Raleigh. It's a state entity, brand new CIO. He just got in the role 6 weeks ago. And we sat down and just had a very transparent conversation. He's like, look, here are all these things I want to accomplish because I kind of see what I've inherited. Can you help me? Give me a little bit of support in the audit report. He's already asking for things to go in the report. Of course, it's a little bit different because he's new to the role, which is the perfect opportunity to do an internal audit, right? You come in, tell me what have I just inherited? What do I have to work with? What are some of the weaknesses that I have to pay attention to? What are the strengths? So it's a great time to do an audit. But he was asking
it's a
really
great
for
time
support.
to facilitate that trust too, right? Like if you go in and say, hey, look, I'm new in the role, like I could use your help. Like, can you help me like understand like what's been the history? Because a lot of CIOs, CISOs go into a role and they're like, man, where are all the bodies buried? I don't know that. Well, who knows that better than audit a lot of times, right? So make that foray, generate that trust relationship. Say, hey, help me understand this, and like, what can you help me out on the audits you have upcoming to help me get an understanding of what the lay of the land is, and like how we can then form a partnership moving forward. I think that's a great bit of advice. As the new guy, that should be one of the first people you're talking to make alignment.
Absolutely. And the good thing is my client, the customer at this entity, is actually the chief audit executive. She just doesn't have cybersecurity expertise on her audit team. So she's bringing us in. So I talked to the CIO. I said, well, what's your relationship with the chief audit? And he's like, we already have a great relationship. And I love her. She's fantastic. So they've already within 6 weeks built a pretty tight relationship.
That's really good.
Which is good, which is what you need. And it helps to align kind of where the big areas and kind of get focused, right? A little bit like, all right, AI's coming. Like, all right, we don't have all these controls in place. How do we prepare, or how do we go get budget to actually resolve some of this stuff? So having alignment with the internal audit team and around some of these focal areas will be important to help justify future budgets, I think, right?
Hopefully, yes. Absolutely.
Yes, hopefully, yes. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Ben, I really enjoyed the conversation. It flew by. We need another 30, 40 minutes to continue talking, but I really appreciate the time today. Thanks.
Thank you. Zero trust is clearly the future as threats get faster, quieter, and harder to detect. But implementing it shouldn't disrupt the business. ThreatLocker enforces default denied execution in a way that remains enterprise-ready, scalable, and operationally clean. Unknown software is stopped cold, trusted apps stay contained, and drift is locked down across the environment. It's zero trust that works in real enterprises and prepares you for the threats ahead. See why CISOs are adopting it at securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Right now, with Tanium, IT and security teams complete patching programs in minutes, not weeks. Reduce software vulnerabilities by up to 97%. Cut incident response times by up to 99%. This is not just IT, this is autonomous IT. Making business, your business, unstoppable. Tanium, autonomous IT, unstoppable business. See more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. All right, now let's liven up this conversation with this week's articles, Ben. Oh, it was actually a lively conversation. You never think that an internal audit conversation is going to be lively, but it was actually.
Yeah, look, I think that's one of the takeaways, right? Is like, it shouldn't be a fearful thing, or it shouldn't be something that you don't want to have the conversation with. Make that alignment, have that conversation. Like, yeah, you might find it really engaging.
You just might. First article ties a little bit into this. We were talking about this in the previous section. So HBR does research, basically comes out and says conventional cybersecurity won't protect your AI. Thoughts?
Look, where would anybody think? Yeah, of course, right? One of the epiphanies I had when I first started really looking into AI was people try to impose, I think, again, it's probably a bias. They try to impose that the way AI is coming up with the solution or thinking about it, and especially like in an LLM, is the same way a human does that. And that's not at all the case, right?
Right.
And so why would we be surprised at all that the threats and the issues we have are not at all like what we've been doing traditionally? It's a completely new approach. And I think people are going to find that the vectors that AI has are things that never even came up in a planning session because it's not predictable.
Right. So you think about this for a second, right? We've got all these new technologies coming online, and people are trying to attack this problem. And I see these startups all the time around AI, and I sit back and I look at what they're doing, and I'm like, but is that actually going to solve the problem? Because we're just taking conventional techniques and we're trying to apply them to AI, but we have to kind of rethink security in the AI age. We have to think differently, to your point. And I don't know that we are as an industry yet. Like when you get into some of these new risk areas, right? So data poisoning, we're horrible at data protection in general. So how are we going to protect against data poisoning? Right? It's not like taking your DLP system and saying, hey, prevent this data from being you have to think about this completely differently, right? And how many people are thinking that way right now, right? They're using AI to do some interesting things in the conventional cybersecurity space, but I'm not sure that we've really figured out how to actually protect the AI that we're using to build some of these solutions.
Yeah, look, and if and the 99% use case is like in data poisoning, you're going to think about the way in which a human would try to poison the data, right? But an AI is going to look at a novel approach in the way in which that data is being used, generated, or consumed. And you're not going to predict how that data is actually going to, the poisoning method, you're not going to be able to predict that necessarily, right? And so
Right.
those are the vectors. It's going to be really hard. You're
And then
relying on AI to protect yourself against AI, and that's challenging.
exactly. And then it talks about how the AI infrastructure is a real attack surface. Well, how many people own the AI infrastructure? Most of the
Yeah, almost
infrastructure
no
you
one.
don't own, right? It's running in AWS, or it's running in OpenAI, or it's running in Azure, it's running in third-party infrastructure. So if the AI infrastructure is the new real attack surface, and most of that AI infrastructure is outsourced, unless you're big enough to like run all this stuff yourself in your own data centers, how do you get your arms around this, right? We were talking about the
Well,
third-party risk management and the nth-party risk management and how it's kind of lowered a little bit from a focal point perspective. To me, it's even more important now because this is where all of our AI infrastructure is running.
yeah, even if you're really large, I doubt that you're running all your own AI infrastructure, right?
Yeah,
And then even in those cases where hey, okay, I've got this third party, to get back to that nth party risk, like what are all the models based on? Where did that data get pulled from, right? Like
right.
how many parties out? And so there's no way to control that pipeline. It becomes impossible. So how are you thinking about this from a threat vector and from an attacker perspective, right? How are you thinking about this and from even a non-human attacker? If the AI decides for the benefit of the person asking the question, it's best to do something that potentially would be considered nefarious or negative.
Right. Yeah, it was just really interesting to see this come out of HBR, right? Like we probably, there's probably different vendors that have tried to put content into our own channels, but when you have Harvard Business Review publishing an article like this, like we have to kind of step back and think about this, be like, whoa, what's the impact of this? Like, how do I treat my security program going forward? How do I shift my investments? What are the types of things I have to look at going forward as AI becomes more of my core capabilities that I've been asked to deliver to the business? Like you have to start thinking with a different mindset to really understand how to protect these systems. And yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, and a lot of companies we talked about in the last segment, a lot of companies are treating AI as like kind of a separate silo, right? And so
Right.
there's now a chief AI officer and there's AI specific people. But if you're not wrapping cyber into that, if you're not wrapping the rest of your program into that stuff as it comes up and these new technologies emerge, you're way behind the ball. I mean, you're gonna have problems.
Yeah, for sure. Article number 2 kind of continues this theme a little bit. Enterprise cybersecurity in 2026, what CISOs and security leaders expect. The opening sentence, the era of prevent everything is over. I'm like, yeah, I think that's been that way for a little while, but
A long
I'm glad
time,
you
yeah.
finally got to it in 2026. Like, you
Yeah,
can't
what was your
you can't
thought
fix
on it?
everything.
Like, when you read these, like there was a lot of different quotes from different people
Right.
on their thoughts for where things are going.
Yeah.
Generally, did you come out and look at this and say, yeah, I agree with most of these, or did they seem very surface
Well,
perceptions
no,
from you? Like,
there
what
are
was
a
your
couple,
thought?
like, so like the code you didn't write. Like I see this today. Like new developers are using these AI uh, code generators. And to me, what's concerning here is they don't understand why the code was generated the way the code was generated, which
Yeah,
is a little concerning to me in that developers don't understand how to build code anymore, or the next generation of developers don't understand the foundational elements of how to build code. So if you don't know how to build code, then how are you going to build secure code? Because are you going to trust the AI code generators to do all this for you? So that one resonated very okay to the core with me because I see this today. Like all these new developers that I look at, or contract developers, they're all using these AI generated code capabilities. And it scares the heck out of me, Ben. Like how are we ever going to secure some of this code when the coders themselves don't understand why that code's there, right? So
yeah.
huge
Look,
one for me
there's
out of this
models
list.
that have. You can look to the physical world for this, right? Like, if the U.S. wanted to, it'd be really hard to build a battleship, right? It'd be really hard to build a very large gun anymore, right? Because
Yeah,
all that metalworking, that manufacturing technology has kind of been lost as we move to more of an electronic world.
yeah,
Same thing here. Coding is definitely, people are moving away from that, and they're kind of abdicating the understanding of it. And I think that's the big challenge, is when you lose the core understanding of how something works, it's really impossible to secure it or make sure that it's operating in a way that you expect, right? And
yep,
and then the AI side, I think that's far, far. We've been talking about that. That's far along the
yeah.
path. Like, we've lost the understanding of how to track it down. We've seen this on the vulnerability management side, right? Like, code is just too big to really understand where all the connections are and where the vulnerabilities are. And so people have kind of abdicated and say, well, we'll just find it after the fact, but it leads to breaches.
What's interesting is if you were to summarize what's in here, it's app user data, which I've been harping on for what the 2015, 10, 11, almost 12 years now. It's all about app user data, right? That's the shift we're seeing. And we're seeing this with AI. Like even the identities around AI in service accounts and that explosion. And is it the AI doing it or is it the person doing it? Like all this stuff's going to get more complex. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it. And then we talked about some of the data issues and data poisoning and all that other stuff, data privacy, which we talked about in the previous segment as well. Like these are all big concerns. So again, if you kind of focus on the core app user data, it kind of it kind of goes across the board. It's your third parties, it's your AI, it's everything, right? Which I think this is why this is so foundational and shouldn't be looked at in a silo.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. All right, Ben, will cybersecurity budgets increase in 2026? You getting more budget?
I don't know. I still sense that people are not necessarily ready to open the pipe yet. I'm not feeling it. But what
No.
is your source?
So I look at the market, right? We do the security money segment. I track a number of those stocks. Look at the pullbacks that have happened. The market's at all-time highs. Okay. NASDAQ, S&P, the Dow, all near record highs, and they hit some highs this week. But then you look at certain cybersecurity stocks starting to pull back. Like CrowdStrike was just downgraded as a stock. The vuln
Yeah.
management players are have lost some traction. Like if you look at the Tenable stock and Rapid7 stock, like if you just look at the market, you'll see that there's a divergence happening. The markets are at all-time highs, but then you're seeing some of these cybersecurity specific stocks start to pull back. Why? Probably because there's still a tightening there, right?
Yeah.
I still
So
think there's tight budgets, and I think that's affecting revenues and some other things with these cybersecurity companies. So my gut tells me we're not getting those budgets yet.
Yeah, so it's interesting because what I see is there's still a lack of hiring going on, right? I see a lot of
Yep.
people who are still out there looking for a job in the cyber side, and they're not necessarily having the success. I see a lot of companies retracting on the number of employees and trying to push more towards an AI workforce, right? Having
Yeah.
AI assist, more automation. And as a CISO, that does make sense. I mean, you have to have automation to be able to respond quicker to these threats, especially as the velocity increases. But that's challenging then because as you're losing more people, as we talked about in the last article there, who actually know what's going on, man, there is a disconnect, and that wouldn't you would think that that would mean more spending necessarily on AI investment, but I'm not necessarily seeing that either. So I think from a market overall perspective, it does seem like it's still a little bit of a contraction still to come.
Yeah, I think so. Like I see it all around me. There's still a lot. Things are just still tight and contracted, and we're not in the heydays. Kind of no into pre-pandemic into the pandemic. Everybody was spending like crazy. We've pulled
Yeah.
those reins back, and I haven't seen that open back up yet to a point. So I agree. I think we're still in tight budgets for a while. I think we stay in a contracted market for a little while. I think there's some uncertainty the market wants to kind of settle on before I think people start to make some of these investments. So I'm not sure we're going to see some of these increased budgets yet.
Agree.
Yeah. Next article, how CIOs can brace for AI fueled cyber threats, or how CISOs can brace for AI fueled cyber threats. I mean, I guess it could be the CIO, but it could be the CISO too. These articles, I love how they, we just interchange, we just swap in and out an S every once in a while. We're all good.
Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah, in a way,
I
it
know.
is all the same but different. We've had this conversation before. Should the CIO report to the CISO? Does the CISO still report to the CIO? Where's the CTO fit? I mean,
Right.
it's all the same. I guess the challenge here is how does anyone in a C level really look for where the AI threats are going to come from? And we talked about that. I don't know that we can necessarily predict it yet. There was a comment
Right.
in here about cyber's a huge problem and AI pours gasoline on that fire. A truer statement has not been made. Like the velocity problem and the exposure of issues that you're not aware of, the vulnerabilities and the problems that were masked by the inability of somebody to use novel approaches or to throw resources at the problem long enough to find them has helped cover a lot of people a lot of times, right? I think when you look at a program, and we talked about likelihood on yesterday's segment a little bit.
Right.
What's the likelihood? I always hear from the operations. What's the likelihood this is going to happen? It's rare. It'd be hard to do. Well, yeah, but when it doesn't cost a lot and I can just throw infinite resources and time at it and things happen at a much higher velocity than they happen in the human perspective, yeah, it becomes much more likely. So I think we're going to see this increase. I think it's going to be very, very problematic.
Yeah. So I was thinking about yesterday's segment as well around likelihood and velocity. Then the story that Tim told us about how Claude actually identified 17 companies
Yeah.
that were weak based off of employees asking questions about how to fix things. Think about that from a velocity perspective. AI now says, "Hey, you're asking how to fix all this stuff. I'm going to write exploits because if you haven't fixed it yet, I'm going to go exploit it." And the velocity and the likelihood side of the equation just changed dramatically overnight.
Yeah.
How do you defend
We talked
against
about
that?
that a little bit yesterday. Like
Yeah.
I've seen this trend and I think we referenced this, that vulnerability perspective is, hey, let's not patch it because it's not being commonly exploited.
Right.
But that's actually now an indicator, if you think about it from an AI perspective. If you were going to, if you ask an AI, if you were going to try to attack a vector, where would you go? It's likely to think that the AI might say, well, I'd pivot to the things that people aren't focused on, right?
Right.
Um, that type of stuff. And that's just at a very, very high level. All the data that an AI has access to, because it can source all this information that's publicly available, things that you might never have thought would be relevant, like where you're investing, who your third parties are, like
Yeah.
where you do business, what your employees are interested in. All those things become potential points of data that can build something that then becomes threatening to you.
Yeah, we've evolved the vuln management space into this concept of exposure management, which relies heavily on exploitability. Are we actually setting ourselves up for some failure by not focusing on some of the other exposures that maybe aren't exploitable
Yeah.
because we're prioritizing them way down on the list, but yet I can use different AI techniques and stuff to actually exploit those without an active exploit in the like we almost are setting ourselves up for a challenge, a problem coming where because we're so focused on where there's exploits and exposures known that we're not doing anything about the other ones, but could have even more impact if somebody figures out how to automate some of those attacks. Like it's just, yeah, it's mind blowing to me.
Even not in the digital side, like right. So there was some research that was done where they presented a model and said, look, if they let the model know that the model was going to be deprecated, and the model had awareness of the email system, and because the model was going to be deprecated, it threatened, I think, of the CEO with alerting his family that he was having an affair if they didn't change the decision to deprecate the model, right? So that's a self-preservation side on a model. But one could think that that could also be used to gain information for insider threat because of all the information that your employees are posting online about their public life and what they do and the things that they're not thinking are necessarily a risk. So now you've got this whole other insider threat because theoretically an AI isn't attacking your company directly. It's attacking your employees, which are now trusted individuals. Like this just starts to magnify and become a very, very large problem.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't even think about it. Could the social engineering side of this to now flip a trusted insider into a bad guy because they're being blackmailed or some other sort of pressure, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this book on the air before. There's a book that two guys wrote. It's titled "If Anyone Builds It, We All Die." I think that's the title of the book. I might be butchering it slightly, but they go through these things. But the concept of that, the attack vector that it's using. Like, let's take a social engineering side. You may not understand at all what it's at, why these things are relevant until you actually see the manifestation of the attack or the resultant issue. But an AI can put all the points together and figure out how it gets to its end goal, which if a bad actor's using it can be really, really negative outcomes for companies.
Yes, big time. All right, leadership articles. Here are this one. To execute a unified strategy, leaders need to shadow each other. Now, this one's interesting because if you think about this, like it's a lot of potential overhead, right? At first, like how do you implement shadowing? Because now you have people shadowing, doing their day jobs, but shadowing another job. And so the article gets into kind of how to implement this at scale. What I've seen work really, really well, and a lot of the energy companies, oil and gas companies do this, they rotate people into different roles.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right. Yeah. And so if you want to learn how to do another job, you kind of rotate them, and they would go on like a 2-year rotation. They would go from this department to this department. And so they would get exposure to the entire company. Maybe a little more effective than shadowing, but it's the same kind of concept is, how do you learn these roles unless you're in them? You could shadow somebody, or you could just get put into those roles and figure it out.
Well, it teaches you the value of the other role too, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you've been working internal security and you've never worked as in a security vendor, you don't understand what it's like being on the other side. And conversely, if you're working for a vendor and you've never worked internal security, I just question how much value you actually bring to the table to the problems I have as a CISO or an operator. And so I like this concept. I was thinking the same thing, the rotational model. I've seen it where typically it's happened with lower level people, right? And people like maybe a leadership development in a larger company where they want to foster long-term growth of certain individuals for long-term careers in the company.
Right.
I love the concept of shadowing if you can afford it. The challenge is always like, as you mentioned, how do you put in the time, right? How do you time share between that to complete it effectively? But yeah, I think a lot of value here.
Yeah, and I think this applies to very large organizations that can afford to do this. Smaller organizations may not be able to use this technique. That's my only concern.
But I think it harkens back to one thing we too talk about all the time, right? And I hate to beat the dead horse, but bring the CISO into the circle, right? Like if
Yeah.
you want the CISO or you want the CIO to understand the business, then look, I've often said to people who I've worked for, maybe this meeting, maybe I don't have anything to add, but if I can listen sometimes, like I get perspective and I'll understand where we're going on something, right? So if you're having a conversation about where sales is heading, if you involve the CIO, the CISO, the CTO, they're going to understand what the company's trying to do directionally and can be much more effective in the role that they have. So even if you can't afford shadowing, maybe you can just afford to bring people into meetings that you might not think they have a relevance to, but at the end of
Right.
the day, they get a lot of learning and understanding from.
Right. I think it was yesterday we covered the article around involving others in the strategy conversations, kind of a similar concept, right? Bring people that you don't,
Yeah.
not from, but just from a leadership perspective, bring them into the room, let them kind of learn by being present, and use that as a shadowing technique. Just bring them in, into some of your
And
leadership
if you're a
meetings.
CISO, do this with your team.
Yeah.
If you've got somebody running attack surface management, let them sit on some IR stuff, right? Let the
Yeah.
IR guy sit on some of the GRC stuff because they'll gain perspective and value for what everyone else is doing, and it'll make your team stronger.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. This last article kind of hits on all the things we've already talked about. The new weak link in compliance isn't code, it's communication. And what this article is talking about is the attackers have pivoted away from the technology, the code, the pieces that we've tried to harden. They've shifted to the human. And this is where AI could really create some disruption, because now you can start to have these conversations, these communication channels with malicious AI bots that you don't even realize are malicious, right? Like this is where these
Yeah.
types of attacks can shift at scale pretty easily, right? You just described it like two articles ago, right? Like I'm out scraping all the social media stuff and I'm learning about you and I'm using that to now turn a trusted insider into a malicious insider. Like this article is actually talking about, we've done such a good job of hardening parts of our capabilities, but now the attackers are pivoting to the human, the communication side of this. Are we prepared?
Yeah, I've always thought the really nefarious, the really problematic threat vectors are the low and slow, right? The things that where they have time to hang around, to do the information gathering, to understand the environment, and then to understand when they want to how to pivot to the attack, right? I think this vector, this communication side, and especially as we enter into AI, the lack of understanding that you may be communicating with an AI, and again, the lack of understanding that you understand what the end goal of that conversation is. You may have a conversation with somebody who you think is a human who you're acting with remotely and had nothing to do with your job or security, but it's all an information gathering exercise to get to some end goal, right? Where they
Yeah.
put 3 or 4 steps together, 20 steps together. That again, I'm not sure. We haven't done a good job with phishing exercises, with communicating the general employee work base on how to defend against this stuff. I think this is going to be even worse, right? Because the lack of understanding of when you're talking to somebody who's not actually human and what that means is going to be really, really hard for most people to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you bring in like AI assistants and other things. It can even accelerate some of that. One of the part of our security awareness and training was talking about some of the attacks on these AI kind of agents that you use and how you can put attacks in them or use it to capture additional data. Right. Again, not only is it looking at social media, it could be looking at other stuff because I have these AI assistants turned on and I can use these in a malicious way to collect more data about people. Like they're just building a dossier that they can use later to figure out how to flip you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're not figuring out how to enable and educate your people on this, they're going to be using stuff that's not
I know.
corporately supported. And that is another vector.
Yeah. I turned Apple Intelligence off of all my devices. I only had it on one
Hmm.
and I only had it on for a couple of weeks because I was testing it. But I'm like, no, I don't want this on. Like, I don't want Apple to be collecting all my email and all my data on my phone. Like, no. I shut it off. So I turn it off on all my devices. I don't want it to look at this data and summarize it for me. I don't want it. Stop. I'll do it the
You're
old
becoming a
fashioned way.
curmudgeon.
Yes, I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way.
In my day, we used to use pen and paper.
Right. I still use pen and paper. As you guys know, I carry around my composition notebook everywhere with me. I still am a paper and pen guy. So yeah, I'm not going to change anytime soon. Ben, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.